Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Blogging Theology. This is part 2 of a 3-part series on Islam and psychology. And I'm delighted to be joined again with Dr. Francesca. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much.
Just to remind ourselves of Francesca's areas of expertise. She has a master's degree in neurocognitive psychology and a PhD in systemic neuroscience, both from the University of Munich, and also a diploma in Islamic psychology from the Cambridge Muslim College. And she's been working inside and outside of academia on issues to do with Muslim identity in Italy. And she's also the director of the Ibn Rushd Islamic Studies Institute, the first of its kind in Italian, a madrasa for children and youth. In the first video, we looked at the topic, did Muslims invent psychology? The short answer is yes, but you can watch that video for all the details of the key figures in this field over the centuries, long before the West thought it was the originator of this topic. But in this video, the second, we're going to be looking at a critique of Western psychology from an Islamic perspective. So the question has to be, what is psychology from an Islamic perspective?
Yes, thank you so much, Paul. This is very important to understand when we're talking about Islamic psychology, is that this is a traditional Islamic discipline, as old as other Islamic sciences. So when we talk about Islamic history, Islamic philosophy, we should understand that Islamic psychology, even though not as known as well as, it is as ancient and as its own tradition. And its subject, it's also known as ilm al-nafs in traditional Arab-speaking countries, is the equilibrium of all the parts that make up a human being. And this, of course, is very ambitious, because this is going to include the jism, which is our body. So Islamic psychology also looks at physical health in its relationship with the mental. Our self, which is the nafs, and this self is generally the part that drags us down towards material words, toward negativity, or towards self-destruction even, and that we have to educate. We call it riyadatul nafs. So as if we were educating a child of the nafs. And then we have the heart, which is the qalb. It's our door between what is outside and what is inside. And this can be, for example, like the source also of trauma, right? When something that is very violent outside like enters the inside, and the inside of the human being is pure and delicate. And not only that, it does also many other things. Among them, the function of the heart is also our intellect, we believe. And then finally, the soul, of course, the ruh, the spirit, really the spiritual part of us. And many other things interact with it and are the subject of Islamic psychology. For example, the fitra, our instinctual part, our predisposition. And the equilibrium between all of this and how to improve them is the subject of Islamic psychology. So this can be both in a positive light to understand ourselves better, almost philosophically, or in a therapeutic light to help people that have problems in that.
Okay. Now, one of the most important figures of modern Islamic psychology, Dr. Malik Badri, has said that Western psychology has become, quote, soulless, perhaps literally as well as metaphorically. I mean, well, what does it mean, do you think? What's he getting at?
Yes, I strongly advise everybody who is interested in Islamic psychology to read Dr. Malik Badri's book. I have it here, but I'm not as good as you and showing books on screen. And it is The Dilemma of Muslim Psychologists. Right. It is an easy book. It's very short. It even has illustrations. So it's a fun read. And there he argued, and we are in the 70s. So, of course, the landscape of psychology is different. But he said that in ancient Greece and even in India, psychology was the study of the soul. And by studying psychology, you studied the moral aspect of the human being. You studied their environment. You studied family. You studied a lot of things. And then at a certain point, it became from this wide study to the study of the mind. And this is where also we have the Cartesian shift, right? Body and mind, two substances in Western philosophy. But then when we ended up in complete reductionism, like nowadays, it became study of behavior. Right. So now neurosciences are telling, though, we're already doing that, so psychology basically is useless, does not have a standalone discipline dignity. So Dr. Malik Badri,
so psychology gets reduced to neuroscience then, that it's got an ultimate materialist reductionist attitude, and any notion of soul, the accusation is psychology has become soulless, just disappeared. Indeed, the soul doesn't even exist in that particular worldview. But of course, the existence of the soul, not as metaphor, but as an ontological reality, is key, is it not, to Islamic psychology and mental health and well-being and so on.
Yes, and there are actually, just to understand how dangerous the situation has become, there are now neuroscientists who are claiming that the mind does not exist, not only the soul, of course, the mind does not exist. All that exists is the brain, and as an activity of the brain, then the mind arises. But how does it do so? Well, we don't know, but we will know. And that's been the key word, the key claim of neuroscience for the last 20 years. Now we will eventually explain out the mind, we'll explain out everything. Eventually, they were not able to. So even neuroscience is going under a soulless sort of phase, and overall illusion was shattered on that.
Extraordinary. Now, there are different schools of psychology or psychotherapy. What is their difference then from an Islamic perspective?
Yes. Dr. Malik Badri came in a time in which the schools were different. So he talks about a lot about psychoanalysis, classical psychoanalysis. Nowadays, almost nobody practices that. There is psychodynamic therapy, but a bit different than that. Or he was talking about behaviorism, and that also changed a lot. But nowadays, we have different schools, and we can try to expand his attitude on them. First of all, by claiming that Islamic psychology is not just another school of psychology. It's not just another modality of doing the same thing, because we're doing a different thing if our epistemology is different. Okay, so that's first of all very important.
So the epistemology is different. Now, the whole understanding how we come to know ourselves, know thyself, the Delphic oracle, is different. And this is not just the Islamicization of Western psychology. There is a different a foundation, an epistemological foundation to Islamic psychology. And that is a really important point you're making. I just wanted to stress that.
Yes, because even within Islamic psychology, observing it as someone who does Islamic psychology every day, I'm seeing emerging different schools. There are different ways of helping people who are not feeling well. And my way might not be the same of others. So these are schools, but they are born from the same metaphysical institution, which is irreducible to others. At the same time, as Muslim psychologists, since we need to practice our work in the West, we also are all trained in Western Islamic psychology. So Muslim psychologists have this double citizenship in the field of psychology, right? All the time. And it is positive, because I think that also at the time of the great Islamic philosophers, they were well acquainted with the Quran and traditional scientists and with Greek philosophy. And that's where unicity came from, and where they could really build something. So we do that as well in psychology, and it is positive. So what do we say about these different schools? For example, I'm trained in the cognitive behavioral one, where it uses a lot of analyzation of the behavior, of the thinking pattern. So it is a type where you talk a lot, you work on yourself openly a lot. Some other schools work more on the unconscious. And that is also good, because that's also a part of something we have. Some other schools work a lot on somatic feelings. And as Muslims, we do not see these things as enemies of each other like they do sometimes, right? It's not our school is the only school that can achieve that % healing. No, we take the good where we find it, as the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that knowledge is the lost property of the believer.
Yes.
So I encourage Muslim psychologists to be as eclectic as they can be. If they know a technique, use it. If they know something, use it and employ it in a creative, open way. This is what Islam teaches us.
Wow. That's a very refreshing way, rather than having a kind of a narrow methodology that's rigidly followed, and we don't step outside of that or notice any other phenomena. To be as eclectic as possible. I like that, but obviously there is a methodology, that there are parameters. It's not like we just go into wacky science or pseudoscience. So there is a discipline there. So how does a Muslim psychologist operate differently? I mean, I can imagine from what you said, someone might push back and say, look, where is the academic or the scientific discipline here if we are just like magpies picking up shiny objects from all over the place, no matter where they are? Isn't this a bit unprofessional? I mean, I'm being a bit devil's advocate here, but
yes.
How would you respond to that? How does a Muslim psychologist actually operate then?
Yes, that's a very good critique. So thanks for bringing this up, because maybe many viewers might be thinking that. So I want to clarify this. This is, in Islamic psychology, we have a pattern that we adopt with each client, and is actually a way, an operational strategy that we adopt. And that is always the same, more or less. And this was already categorized and explained by Imam Ghazali in the year 1100. Wow. So it is quite tried and tested, I would like to say. But psychology is a very peculiar field. So sometimes you will find that a person has an affinity for something. And for that person, that particular affinity might help them heal faster. So for example, and this also goes with some purely psychological phenomena, like the placebo effect. We have found when it, and not, this is not we, it's just the psychological community, the Western psychological community has found that people who go to psychotherapy, the effect of the techniques that are used in psychotherapy account only for 15% of the therapeutic result. So people have to understand that psychology is not like medicine. Mental health is not like physical health. It is a useful analogy, but it is not the same. Analogy never operates on identities, right? There are things that are same in one aspect, but different on other aspect. Yeah. And the aspect is that in psychology, the therapeutic relationship is what really works better than techniques.
Right.
So the more you are an eclectic person, the more you are able to construct therapeutic relationships with people. But this is a bit difficult to talk about on the philosophical aspect. So I will tell you, like your question, how do we operate? Okay. So first thing I want to say, and it's very important to understand how we work as Muslim psychologists, is that we do not work only on Muslims. Okay. Because Islamic psychology is a way of understanding the human being.
So it's meant to be universal. It's not just Islamic psychology. It's not just for Muslims, as if it was just a religious cult. No, that this is a perception of what it is to be human in relationship to not only our own constituent elements, having a soul, having a heart in a physical and a metaphorical sense, and so on, but also in our relationship with the divine. And I think it's the absence, well, as far as I can see, the absence of God in contemporary Western materialist psychology, which is the most striking feature when it comes to comparing it with Islamic understanding, which is open to the transcendent. And I think this is as a source of healing as well. And things like the Quran is what the Quran calls itself, a book of healing. And it obviously is. If you read it with an open heart, it is healing and transformative psychologically, existentially. So also a source of benefit for the person who is looking for a relief from suffering, mental suffering, I mean. So, in that sense, much more eclectic and much more open to all realities holistically, not just the narrow psychophysical realities of neuroscience and so on.
Yes. And I had, for example, a client once who came to me, and because one might ask, okay, why would you want to go to a Muslim psychologist if you live in Italy? 98% of the population is not Muslim, and visibly Muslim. Why on earth would you go to her? She told me, well, I've tried everything. I tried psychoanalysis, CBT, I've tried Ayurvedic. This I think is the only thing left. So let's go and have a try. So sometimes people have this type of motivation. And if a relationship of trust can be really established, then I believe strongly that you can help people on their mental health, even if they do not believe in the same things as you. So what is your role then? Because you're not just there to give religious advice, clearly. This is not like a sheikh, right? It's a different job. So an image that already Al-Ghazali gave, but all Islamic psychologists use, is the role of the therapist as a mirror, okay? Mirrors are something that reflect, of course, but in the old times, it was really a hard work to have a mirror because you had to polish it constantly or it will lose the ability to reflect. So in the ancient times, saying that something is like a mirror, it means it reflects, but it also means it's a lot of hard work to have one. So the therapist should do the hard work on themselves, because the idea in Islamic psychology is that you cannot guide, you cannot accompany someone to go higher than what you have already experimented. It's very experiential based. You're not talking from a book and just telling you should do this, you should do that. No, you have to have lived that same thing yourself. And companionship, suhba, is also a key term. So we are removing this excessively hierarchical, stiff type of interaction between therapist and client. That is sometimes still the case in Western psychologies, where the client then puts the therapist on a pedestal, or is not allowed to talk to them about their personal matter, or it can't even know if they're married or not. This kind of stiffness and excessive limits we do not put, because we are humans in front of a human being, and we are there with the heart meaning with absolute presence. And of course, then there is the work itself. But the work itself, I stress, allows only 15% of the overall effect. And of course, if we're Muslim psychologists talking to a Muslim client, we know that eventually it's Allah that heals, and we are tools of that healing. But the work is basically involving the heart in the session. This is very different than the very cognitive, intellectual, and sometimes even performative role. Well, the therapist says the deep phrase and you're in awe of their depth. That is really not what's going on there, let's say.
Yeah, because you get the often even in cartoons and newspapers, you get the image of the patient lying on a couch. Is a kind of a Freudian, Sigmund Freudian type thing, and the therapist is somewhere else behind them, literally writing notes, writing down what's been said. And it's a very kind of idiosyncratic notion. Whereas I like what you said there about the heart in Islamic context, the heart being present, that the person is present for them as a human being with another human being, and that there's a connection there, and that connection is healing in itself. But can I ask you, are the discoveries of contemporary psychology, even in the West, are they still valid for Muslims, or are we looking at a parallel system?
Yes. Well, in principles, of course, they are valid. There is no reason. If something works on humans, it also works on Muslims. Okay. So in principle, one should think, of course, but there are limits, because we have many methodological problems in Western psychology, which make it difficult to expand these notions on Muslims. For example, when we look at studies, psychological studies on whichever cognitive function, memory or whatever, usually these are done in big labs, and the big labs are in big cities of the West. So who do they use as subjects? The data is white college students. Yeah. Is this something that we can generalize to a 50-year-old housewife coming from Sri Lanka? I don't know. But neither do the authors of the paper. Nobody knows. That's the problem.
No one's asking.
No one's asking. So this is the first problem. The second problem is replicability. So many times these studies are not even valid for themselves, because many times you publish a study, then there is no follow-up. Someone said once, and when there is a replicability, it is found many times that it was some minor characteristic of the sample causing those results. And now we know that much of Western psychology is not like a discovery in the sense like of the myth of the apple falling on Newton's head, right? But it is theory. It's theory laden, and it is ideologized. So people look for questions and try to answer questions that have a meaning for them. Of course. So science is not this thing that just happens. People discovered, for example, that the nature of human beings is being egoistic. No, they had a hypothesis on that, and they tried to test it to make this come out. I will make two examples. There is recently this whole trend, recently, it's been many years now, the deconstruction of genders. And the only thing that remained that they haven't touched until very recently was the motherly instinct. So you could say in public, motherly instinct is like nothing else. Mothers love in a way that nobody else loves. You can still say that and not being like attacked on all sides. But now there are studies of psychology coming out and saying, well, you know what? Mother instinct doesn't really exist. So why would anybody even question something so obvious to anybody who even saw a cow or an animal, right? It's not just human beings who have, everybody has. It's obvious. It's obvious. Half of the population who is a mother knows that there is nothing like that. But so these studies are being conducted to prove a point that is theoretical. And as Muslims, we have a problem with that because this is not good science.
No, but why? Sorry, you mentioned that a shocking example. Why would otherwise reputable psychologists, if the psychologists are doing this research, seek to demonstrate that the maternal instinct is a fiction? What would be motivating them to do that if it's not science?
Well, one thing is that there are some topics that are trendier than others, and if the topic is trendy, this can help your career a lot. So if you're just finishing your PhD and you want to become a tenured professor and you published in a very high impact journal Factor, then your chances are higher. So you try to invest on trending topics, but it might be even trending like, I don't know, that these years the frontal cortex is more interesting than the occipital cortex in neuroscience. This is something as innocent as that, but sometimes it's not innocent. You might even not really know the full debate, but you know that in general, there's a lot of money behind this project because then the other problem is grants. How do you finance that research?
Right.
And grants are private as well. So there's a market behind these things. So of course, science is not value-free. This is something that many people in the West still need to understand, and they perhaps didn't digest it yet because science is really their last hope, right? Of something being truthful, of something not lying to them. So I believe that a lot of feelings are attached to science. But I have another example on that. The very famous experiment of Dr. Zimbardo, this infamous prison experiment, right? Where he put college students, some were prison guards and some were actual prisoners. Yeah, this is very famous. Eventually, it was all false. And it just came out recently that the data just did not say that. That's not true. He manipulated both people and data to have results that said that human beings are inherently evil. Guess what? They're not. So as Muslim psychologists, we say, of course, if Western psychology finds something, we're open to that. But we also know the flaws in the system. So we're cautious.
We talk about flaws in the system. It's not only Muslims, but also other academics in decolonization studies also criticizing Western psychology. And this is a very interesting move. So what are their main points about the decolonization aspect of this?
Yes, decolonization is something I think that every Muslim with decent culture should stride a little bit to get the crux of it, because it's a very important discipline that helps us understanding the world today. We think we're not colonized if we are in the West. False. We're not colonized if we do not have actual governorates around us. False. So really, please try to learn more about decolonization. Is very important. What they're saying is, well, first of all, Eurocentrism. And which means that people are treated as individuals, while in many other situations, most of my clients, for example, it is a family. It's a family system that is treated, not an individual, because the problem never concerns only one person. Because if a marriage doesn't work well, of course.
Yeah, so you're saying that by Eurocentrism, you mean that the European / American experience is taken as normative in terms of behavior patterns, social organization, families, and that's just the default. And from that, you universalize this experience, these patterns of behavior in Europe or America, as if they're applicable uncritically on everyone. So where there's different understanding of the relationship between the individual and the family, that's simply ignored because of the emphasis on individualism. And so there's a lack of cultural sensitivity there as well, clearly.
Is ignored, and you have been very kind in the way you phrased it, because I would have been much worse on that, and I would have said that it takes the normative experience of European white people and it pathologizes the one of the other. So I have seen many times being pathologized, for example, living in an extended family. I had many of my clients, they live together like it is normal in the Arab world, right? Son-in-law and whatever, the extended family. And the psychologist told them, yeah, of course you feel depressed. You have so many people around. You need your own home. You need your own apartment with just your boyfriend or just your husband or just whatever. So it is pathologized, destroying the thing that perhaps was keeping this person from complete mental breakdown. So this is something that decolonization is finally pointing out, that Western psychology pathologizes non-Western behaviors. And these non-Western behaviors can relate to family, can relate to belief, because I have also seen psychiatrists diagnosing psychosis because someone believed in jinn.
Right. Gosh. Okay.
Yeah. These things happen, and I'm sure they happen also there, not only here. So another point is the lack of cultural sensitivity, gender relationship. When is it anxiety and when is it just a cultural norm which is being broken repeatedly? So these are things that are being pointed out by non-Muslims, and they're things that are very precious for us. And they come together with many other ethical concerns that we have about Western psychology. I don't know if there is time to expand on this just a little bit.
Of course, please, absolutely.
Because also in decolonization, for example, one thing that has been pointed out is that the relationship between the therapist and the client is asymmetrical, right? And it is asymmetrical in a way in which it creates many phenomena that you can avoid. For example, transfer, counter-transfer. These are names of things that happen when the relationship is set up in a very authoritarian way. For example, like Freud did. In fact, these phenomena have been first described in psychoanalysis, not in psychotherapy. But we can avoid them in a more peer-to-peer relationship, which is heart-centered, in which we connect heart-to-heart, person to person with the other person. And this is something that Western psychology has not been able to do. Or also, we have an ethical code in many associations. To be a psychologist or psychotherapy, you have ethical norms. And this, for example, most of the time they exclude the possibility that you might make a religious discourse or that you might practice anything religious. But as an Islamic psychologist, what are you supposed to do if you're going to have ruqya on the client? You just not do it? You just don't agree? You just say, okay, I'm not going to follow it, or you do not sign up, so you are illegal. These are big ethical concerns. And I think that eventually Islamic psychology is moving towards trying to become a recognized school of psychology and going past these problems, but they're still very much open and very much the subject of debate.
Absolutely fascinating. And it's very heartening that decolonization studies is looking at this area as well in psychology, looking at the presuppositions, the supremacist presuppositions of that. So fascinating. Well, I think we will leave it there for part 2. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Francesca. And inshallah, see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Bye.